Thanks for joining us today to discuss life and godliness with Rick and Angela Carter. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, email us at cartersforhope@gmail.com. That's Carters, the number 4, hope@gmail.com. Any questions you have, we'll discuss in future episodes. Right now, sit back and let's join in on the conversation. Happy morning, midday or noon or evening.
I don't know.
We
I don't know what today is.
are in Lufkin, Texas, and you can tell we have procured this fine art behind us and
It's off center, but
this lovely hotel room.
Mhm.
And it is a nice room.
It's very nice.
Our truck was not operational and in the shop still, so we had to come down, and the church had to get us a hotel room. But we've had a great week, great meeting this week. Good folks down here in Lufkin, Texas. Today, we are going to broach a topic that is highly controversial,
Yes,
incredibly controversial,
very much.
but it has been requested. And so
And we don't shy away from controversial.
broach it we must. Into the breach, into the abyss we go.
My word.
Anyway,
One of those days.
we're going to talk today about dating. One of the funnest things as a parent, dealing with teenagers and so
Hormones.
forth. So both of us actually had no instruction on that topic when we were growing up. Angela, of course, grew up not in a Christian home and that dealing with that. So did you even have dating rules when you were growing up?
Well, I mean, kind of, but not really.
Okay.
So it was like you can go on dates after I was 15, I think. And then, obviously all the moral rules.
Yeah. That's what my parents were kind of like. And part of that was, and of course my parents were in ministry, but I don't know that there was much discussed on that idea
No.
at all. And so kind of,
I did a lot of things in a group. So
yeah, well, we did that too.
yeah.
So but it wasn't taught on. It wasn't something that, you really heard much. Probably the first person I ever heard teach on it was brother, my brain went zoomy. You know who I'm talking about.
Dating?
Brother Davis, SM Davis.
Oh, okay.
That actually was the first time I ever heard the term courtship, and it was just in videos. I didn't meet SM Davis until we were pastoring, but I heard, and so that was early when my kids were young. We saw videos from SM Davis on the topic, and it was kind of becoming an issue in that time when our kids were little. And so
it was becoming a controversy.
Yes. And so there's just a lot of controversy about it. About and maybe there were sectors of churches where it was already a controversy, but
not in our little communities.
Not where we were. We didn't know anything about anything. And so
it's the nice thing about small communities.
Angela and I, of course, I wouldn't have recommended our process for my kids. That was for sure. Just, by God's grace, it was a blessing, but
our stubbornness.
I would have lost my mind if my kids would have done what I did. So, but when our kids were young, we were learning about courtship from SM Davis videos. I do recommend his videos, by the way. I think there's some good things there. I don't necessarily, and I couldn't tell you off the top of my head exactly if there's been a long time since I watched the videos, but I don't necessarily do things exactly like SM Davis. We didn't do it just like SM Davis talked about it. No. We just searched the scriptures and pursued, okay, what does God want? And here's part of the problem with this topic is that there isn't a clear, thus saith the Lord, here's how to do it in the Bible in that regard, right? Everything on this is by principle. And there's nothing wrong with building practice on principle. Principle is for the purpose of guiding our decision making and guiding our processes, maybe we might say. And you got to be clear that it is principle and it's not dogma, right? it's not, if you don't do it like I do it, then you're ungodly. And I think that's where people mess up with principle, is making it some firm, hard doctrine. And we've had people call us. I write about courtship in my book, the Raising Godly Children book. And I go through what we did, principles of why we did it, and I even do a courtship questionnaire. And we're going to talk through a lot of that here in our podcast today. But if you want to see more, detailed, this will be more broad in our conversation.
And I think, by the way, I think the courtship questionnaire that's in the book is one of the earlier versions.
Yes, we've
We've
modified
modified
it.
it.
Yeah, I'm sure we have.
So even after that, so
Yeah, yeah. So, but there is principle in the scripture. And so the question is, well, what's the principle based on? And the idea begins with this, that principally relationships are not to be guided by uncertainty. And when you look in the scriptures, when they were talking about marriage, the issue of marriage, there were some direct, ideas, specifically like in Genesis 24. Isaac doesn't go find a wife, is given, presumably Eliezer goes and has guidance from Abraham. Jacob goes and finds a wife, and there's restrictions and requirements on him, things that he needed to have in order essentially to be able to marry the daughter. Primarily, it had to do with serving 7 years, but essentially the idea there, principle is the idea that he needs to prove that he's a man that can
mm,
take care of things, that he's, got his self in order, and he can be trusted, and he can be, and so there's some ideas there, but they're drawn from the scriptures. They're not clearly delineated in the scriptures in that fashion. We see tragedies in the scriptures like Samson, who, told his parents, go get this woman for me. And Samson notoriously chose bad women, and his parents never intervened, and never tried to, correct um, his bent in that
right.
sense. And so he ends up with a prostitute who betrays him. And, there's all kinds of tragedy in the
Mhm.
life of Samson in regard to marriage. So what we know about seeing illustrations in the scriptures are, there's some illustrations of principally what type of things need to be present. And when you think about that in relationship to Genesis 24, it more deals with the things that need to be present in the life of the lady. And there was kind of a list of,
Mhm.
she needs to be kind, and she needs to be a hard worker, and she needs to, these type of things. And then principally, when you look at Jacob, you can see some principles of, he needs to be diligent, and he needs to be a hard worker, and he needs to be able to provide
And
and
faithful and
faithful and things like that. So it's more when you consider the illustrations of the Bible. And that's why I say we draw principles, because there isn't a direct command. And I want to be very clear about this, because sometimes parents want this like absolute command, and
they
they're going
have
to
to do what
command their
I
children,
say.
and they cannot marry whoever unless I say so. And I don't believe that that's really supportable by the scripture in that sense, right? I believe that a parent should be involved.
Yeah.
I believe that a parent should be a guide. I believe that a
An
child
influence.
should rely on the wisdom and the guidance and the help. I do believe a father gives his daughter, and I believe that's more than just in name only. I believe that he ought to have a role in that, but I don't believe in arranged marriages. I don't believe in, I get to decide exclusively and you have no say in it kind of,
Right.
thing. And nor do I believe that the father of a young man should be hyper controlling in the process. I think you're a guide. And at the most, I believe you can really see in the scriptures is that there's guidance given, right?
Right.
There's guidance, and there's direction, and not absolute control. It's influence.
Yeah.
One of my favorite books, I recommended it very, very many times, is written by Shannon Scott, S.A. Scott. And the book's title is Influence. And I think when we talk about this particular topic, it's probably
Mhm.
maybe a really important book for a parent to read,
Yes.
because it doesn't talk about courtship and dating, but it talks about the concept of the difference between influence and control.
Mhm.
And influence is important, and we need to operate on that principle when our children are reaching that stage of looking for a mate, looking for a spouse. We should have cultivated the influence in their life, but we're beyond the point of control now. If a man has to control his son, or a mom, and usually it's not the man, usually it's the mom.
And she whines to the man and makes him do something.
Yeah. I mean, honestly,
I'm just saying.
there's a lot of times when we've seen this that it's more like the man is the surrogate for his dominant wife.
Because mama doesn't like whoever, boy or girl, is marrying, and so she whines to dad and complains to dad until
and I'm
dad
just
feels like he has no choice but to do something.
yeah, that's right, and that's right, and we just ticked off a lot of people,
I know.
but it's true. It's
We don't
it's
have any friends anyway, so who cares?
that's not true, but we may not now. No, I'm just kidding. The thing is that it's it is hard to let go of your children. That is a reality.
It is.
But if you're still controlling when they actually get married, then
Mm.
you did it wrong. You should be influencing, not controlling. And even the courtship process, while I firmly believe parents should be heavily involved in the process, I also believe that they should not be absolute dictator control, of the situation, because these young people, they are going to not be, they're not under your control when they get married. Once they say, I do, they're not yours to control anymore. And if you're still controlling all the way up to the I do, complete control, iron fisted control, then you've done it wrong. And I just want to kind of really emphasize that it is certainly an influence based approach, but it's much more influence involved than the modern dating philosophy.
All right. Yes.
Okay.
Fair.
So I am against modern dating philosophy. And I say modern, but just
Well,
dating philosophy.
it was really heavily pushed when we were growing up. I don't,
Dating.
yes, dating. Like it was
Yeah,
in the late 80s, early 90s.
absolutely.
I mean, it was like date as many people as you can, you
Yes.
know.
Yes. And that was not maybe as much in churches at that time, but it wasn't not there either. I mean, it was the dating culture was still in churches and dating through the youth group and all this
Right.
type stuff. And Bible colleges. And I honestly will tell you, I think a lot of Bible colleges, even today,
Mm.
they'll use the term dating or courtship, but they don't see it as distinct. And
No.
the idea of date as many people in school as you can date, kind of thing is not an uncommon
Many
Bible
of
college
them,
theme. And I'm not saying every Bible
yeah.
college, but in many,
And
it's
many of
very
them
much
go
that
to
way.
Bible college just so that they can find somebody to
Yeah,
date.
you go to get your MRS
Yeah.
degree. That's the
And
joke,
I
right?
don't like anyway, but that's a whole nother topic. But I remember as a young teenager, probably 12, 13, because after school, they would do all the after school specials or whatever. I
Mhm.
remember watching after school specials about the
Conjunction Junction.
no, I never watched that. Um no, these were like after school drama specials.
I'm a Bill. I'm a Bill.
Wow. I did watch that.
The electric company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But on the dangers of
That was when we were kids, though.
yeah, when we were little. The dangers of going too far with your date and the sexual transmitted diseases and how, you shouldn't do those things. I remember
No,
watching
I was never allowed to watch
yeah.
stuff like that, I guess. I don't know.
I remember watching that, and as a young person, it scared me to death. Like I don't want to, which was good. Those worked for me.
Yeah.
They didn't work for anybody else apparently. but I remember that was a big focus, like because dating was a big push,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah. And so when I think of dating, I kind of think of it like dating is a thing where it's primarily driven by personal preferences for appearance. right?
Mm.
It's guided by preference. The goal in modern dating. It's to keep your parents from having any influence in your relationships. Your parents have no business. This is my business, and all this type of stuff. And so parents are eliminated. And often you see in dating discussion stuff the idea of how to prevent your parents from even meeting that person until you've already made the decision. And parents are very much ostracized in this process, and it has uncertain ends. Dating can be purely recreational. When we were younger, and I don't know if this is the case now, but when we were younger, there was very much this sense of even that dating could be evangelistic
Yeah.
dating, like
Yeah.
purposely date lost people so
To
you can
win
bring them to
them.
church and win them to Christ, and
Yeah.
that's wicked because, you're putting yourself in a situation where you're doing the part of intimacy. I don't mean full intimacy. I just mean presumably when you're dating someone, you're not just, asking questions, you're holding hands and you're kissing. I mean, honestly, I never saw anyone dating when I was a kid that wasn't part of the dating process. And so there's this intimacy that takes place there. And I always say, well, the Bible says it's good for a man not to touch a woman. And before marriage is honorable and all, and the bed is undefiled. But prior to that, there ought not be touching. And when I taught on this in our church, I'd bring Angela up on the platform and I'd say, all right, here you go. Touching, not touching, right? That's because you're not going to find yourself in bed together if you're not first holding hands and kissing and all that. I
Yep.
mean, there's a progression that takes place that you become comfortable with physical expressions of emotion and
Yep.
so forth. So there's this progression, and a Christian young person, I do not believe has any business being physically connected to someone until they're married. That's my belief
Right.
that those things are for marriage. Now, but the thing is you can't wait until they're 17, 15 to start telling them that. So I'm thankful we found principles through Davis's videos and studying the scriptures when our kids were very little. And we spent a lot of time building that relationship with our kids from the time they were little. We
Little.
were thinking about them getting married when they were 2 and 3 years
Hmm.
old, 5 years old, not in the sense of thinking, oh, it's going to be wonderful, but thinking, how do we prepare them for this time? How do we prepare them to be ready for marriage, and how do we prepare them to be ready to let us help give them guidance and have an influence in this process when they get to this point. And so I think that the most important conversation here is for those that have children that are young, because if your children are already teenagers and you've never had discussions about this, you're probably in for a fight. You're probably in
Probably.
for rebellion.
That doesn't mean you can't work through it, but it will be
You
harder.
it is harder, and so you've gotta be proactive early
Mhm.
and have their heart. That's the real key to effective courtship is you need to have their heart, because it is difficult once they start getting to that point where there is emotion involved in this person, they really like this person, it's hard for them to set aside their feelings, and trust you. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
reality of it. They've gotta trust you, and they've gotta
Trust
believe that
takes
you have
time.
their best interest and you're not just trying to control them. And I'm thankful that, our kids, all 4 of our kids, let us be a part of that.
Yeah, a huge part of it,
And
and it was awesome.
it was awesome. So, dating is more guided just by personal preferences and recreational. It has uncertain ends. You might not have any intention to marry a person that you're dating. Whereas courtship is different. And this is the why I'm emphasizing this. The primary difference here is that courtship is guided by biblical principle. We're saying first and foremost, the principles of God's word ought to be observed, ought to be, and again, it's not commands, but the guidance that the word of God gives in this area, we ought to take into consideration and as best as possible, pursue a biblical model. And then it has parental oversight, that the parents are involved in this process. And by the way, even Jacob, when he was not, his parents weren't picking his wife, obviously, but he did have instruction as to where to go find a wife and what to do that in that fashion. So there was parental guidance given that he was following when he went to pursue a wife. So there's biblical principle, there's parental guidance. And then the process is, again, not explicitly spelled out, but kind of the concept here of the principle implies this idea that let's find out if this person is spiritually and intellectually uh in a compatible person,
Right.
essentially, before we get to the emotional side of it.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, we did a courtship questionnaire to begin with. And if they found met someone, excuse me, that they thought they were interested in, then it's not like and I think this is where sometimes parents are like, you're not allowed to even talk to someone. Well, how are you going to know if you're interested in potential courtship if you're not even allowed to talk to people?
Yeah. Right.
And by the way, probably one of the bigger issues we had was I would teach on courtship, and there would be people in our church who thought pastor teaches on courtship, and so we need to police whether his kids are, if they're talking to someone, we need to tell them you're not allowed to talk to anyone.
Right.
It's like that wasn't their business. And at no point in teaching on courtship did I ever say, and the whole church is to
To
participate in
our
this
jobs.
process. It's not their job, But
It wasn't
and
the
not
whole
everybody did
church.
that. Not everybody did
It
that,
was
but
just a few people.
yeah. But anyway, it was definitely one of those things where it's like, well, you've got to have some freedom to be able to be a real person and meet people in a
Mhm.
group setting. I'm not talking about dating. I'm not talking about dating. I'm talking about just you're at a church service. It's not sin for a boy to shake a girl's hand, right? And it's troubling if a boy can't shake a girl's hand in the sense of like he's afraid to even shake a hand of a girl. He can't talk to a girl. And I think sometimes we've put so much fear into
Mhm.
this process that our young people don't know. They're afraid to do anything. And and I'm not talking about holding hands, so please don't misunderstand. There is a difference between shaking hands
Mm.
and holding hands, right? I can shake hands with a lady and say, "Good to see you. Glad you're here." That's not the same thing as holding hands with someone.
Okay, so funny story. Pause. Funny story. When you say that, it brought this memory to mind when Ethan and Eternity were courting. Was it Ethan and Eternity or Joshua and Kiska? I think it was Ethan and Eternity. They went over to Steve and Gloria's. Maybe it was Joshua and Kiska. I can't remember now. One of them. They went over to Steve and Gloria's and they were having dinner. And Steve and Gloria, if you've ever been to their house when they have prayer, everybody
I
around the
wouldn't, e-
table
I wouldn't even know.
holds
Most people don't know Stephen
It's
Gloria.
so funny. Sorry, I mean the people back home that know us. Everybody around the table holds hands when they pray, and a lot of people do that. We do that. So anyway, but they had just started courting. It was so fresh. They had just started courting, and they were just like, "Oh, we don't
We can't hold
want, we
hands
can't
while
hold
we're praying. Yeah.
hands."
So they
It
did.
was funny. So they did, but it was
Yeah.
just hilarious. I remember Gloria telling me she was like, I was like peeking and just snickering.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But
Anyway.
yeah. And so there's things like that. But um again, that's where guidance, not like
Yeah.
domination, but that principle, right?
Right. Well, so they actually
Making a
came.
distinction in
Yes.
some of those
So they
things.
actually come home and ask. They're like, "What do we do in situations like that?" Because that was the first situation
Right.
where, like, that there's nothing wrong with that. We're talking about, when you sneak to hold hands, or you're off by yourself, and
Right.
those things. That's what we're talking about. But shaking a hand at church, holding a hand for prayer time,
Yeah.
common sense.
Yeah. Common sense.
But I was very thankful, though, that they were concerned, that they wanted
Yeah,
to
they
make
wanted
sure
to
that
do
they were
right.
doing
And
right.
that tells you what that you
Yeah,
need to know in that sense, doesn't
sure.
it?
Yeah.
Excuse me. There's cedar pollen down here, and
And
it's
it's
got my
bothering
yeah.
us.
Um
Mm.
anyway, so I don't even remember now where we were. We were talking about the principles there.
Yes.
Oh, the courtship questionnaire.
Questionnaire.
Yeah. So the first thing that we wanted to do was find out once they kind of had someone they were interested in, and that happens kind of organically, you know. And by the way, there were people that our kids would say, "Well, what about this person? What do you think about this person?" And we would say, "You know, I already know some things, and I'm not trying to be the you know person that's against everybody by any means. And I give people grace, and I want to give people the opportunity to do right and to, mature and grow. But there are some times where, as a parent, you know some things about an individual, like, well, this person lies a lot, and their relationship with the truth is very tenuous.
There's just some character
There's character
things that
flaws
we're not
that I would
that
be.
could be straightened out, but they haven't
Yeah,
yet.
but before you get in a relationship, let's step back and let's
Yes.
just watch and see where they
Right.
go, right? That what kind of how they respond to correction, how do they
Yeah.
respond to these type of things. So essentially, when you look at the illustration there of Isaac, and you look at the illustration of Rebecca and of Jacob and that process, I kind of drew out from there some ideas of, okay, these are the things that need to be present for a young man to be ready to get married. He
Mhm.
needs to be able to work. He needs to be able to provide. He needs to demonstrate that he is able to do those things
Error.
and has the character to take leadership. I didn't want my daughters in a relationship where they were running the home, even not because I don't love my daughters and trust my daughters, but because there's a biblical model. And
Mhm.
I love what one of the ladies down in Trinidad, one of the
Yeah.
pastor's wives in Trinidad, she's from Brazil, and she said that her grandmother told her that when you go to find a husband, you need to find a man who's more man than you. And
Mhm.
just that idea of you
Yeah.
need to find a man that will lead, right?
Yes.
That he will take leadership. And so I wanted to see that quality in those young men that were looking at my daughters, and not someone who was just gonna, be a limp rag, so to speak. And I wanted to see that quality in my sons. Are they gonna lead?
Right.
Because that matters for the home to be successful. A man needs to take leadership, and he needs to demonstrate that he makes good decisions, and not every decision he's going to make is going to be good. But does he seek God when he makes decisions? When I say make good decisions, I don't mean I agree with every decision he makes. I mean, does he seek God? Does he have a biblical direction and goal and focus in mind? And I wanted to see that not only in my son-in-laws, but in my boys too, to know whether they were ready for that marriage. So with my boys, I trained them that way. And with my daughters, I asked questions, and I examined what is the character of this young man, and how do I know? And I'm thankful that we've got great kids broadly. All of the kids are that our kids married, we consider our kids, and they're all just they're godly young people, and they love each other, and they love the
Yep.
Lord, and they want to serve the Lord. But it wasn't an accident.
No.
It was painstaking
Yes.
asking questions
Yep.
and observing and talking to authorities in their life,
Yeah.
um, other than, well, Keith, our son-in-law Keith, is the only one who was from a different church, actually. And but before they started courting, I talked to his pastor. Well, I talked to his father, I talked to his pastor, I talked to his youth director. I talked to men in his life and said, "Tell me about Keith. Tell me what kind of character does he have? What kind of, person is he? And is he a hard worker? And give me illustrations," because I didn't know him. And I'm thankful that I did that, because I was able to get to have a sense of who he was. And that's the idea behind the courtship questionnaire, is to find out what kind of spiritual aptitude does this person have? Are
Right.
they spiritually focused? I cannot tell you how many times, because I don't know, but I know it's been numerous times. But I can't tell you the people that I've counseled who met in Bible college, and well, they just assume because we're both in Bible college that we're both wanting to serve God.
Yeah.
And that is not always the case.
And then they fall out of ministry, they fall out of church, and because they didn't have the right.
And some kids go to Bible college because they don't have anything else to do.
Yeah.
They don't have any direction or goal for their life. They don't feel called to ministry, but it's like, well, go to Bible college. Maybe God will call you, you know? And I'm not against Bible college in that sense, but I think that that's where the courtship side comes in. You don't make assumptions about someone. You ask the questions. What what is it? And parents helping with that guidance, you know, so we use the courtship questionnaire to talk about all of those type of questions. And what do you believe about stuff? What do you believe about, um, tattoos? What do you believe about drinking? What do you believe about, and this is
Children, and what do you
children, and
think about
this is
discipline and
before the dating side of courtship, if we could call it that, begins. It's the evaluation side is ask questions, ask questions, and get to know
Mhm.
who this person is, and follow-up questions. You're against tattoos. Why? Was there ever a situation where you might think it's okay? I'm just using that as an illustration. It's a real examination of, do these people really believe what they're saying, or are they just parroting what they're supposed to because of where we're at? And, is this part of their belief system, or, what is it?
Mhm.
And so there's that spiritual examination, and, what do they believe about intimacy? What do they believe about, church? Are they Baptist because they're convicted about being an independent Baptist, or are they Baptist because they grew up in it, and they don't truly believe in God even? They're kind of more agnostic, and,
Yeah.
whatever. And I'm saying all of those things are things
Questions,
people have
questions,
found out
questions.
after they got married because they never asked the question. And that's really the fundamental principle of courtship. It's not the control of a parent running things. That's not the principle of courtship. The principle of courtship is a thorough examination spiritually and intellectually, with help from a parent guiding that, and giving that input, and giving that sense of, what about this? What about that? Ask this question, ask that question. Does that matter to you? If it matters to you, then is that something you can live with? Because you may find there's things you disagree with. Just because you disagree on something doesn't mean you can't be married. You'll find out when you get married, there's things you disagree on that you didn't even know you disagreed on. You can't, but they're minor things.
Right, they're not the major thing.
But if it's something you can't live with, you need to know that before you get involved, before
Right.
your emotions get involved,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And you decide, well, I'm just going to overlook it because they're so cute, and
Right.
those type of things.
Well,
So
then just also sometimes in those questions, they may say something, and as a parent, you sit down with them, you're like, okay, so let's think about where this philosophy leads, because we don't always think about that,
right.
Is it helping as
As
a
a young
child?
person, you're not thinking about the end of a philosophy. You're
Right.
you're just like, well, I don't know. That's
Right. Okay, so this on the surface, this philosophy sounds okay, but let's think through this philosophy process, and where is it going to lead you?
right.
And they need help. They haven't learned to do that yet. They need help learning to process those things like that. So,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why the parent needs to have an influence and be involved. And again, it's guiding them through the process, not commanding them through the process.
yeah.
And so those questions, the questionnaire kind of, and that's in the book. It really, I guess the first iteration of it, or I don't know what level, I don't remember which one we put in there, but it's not been that long ago. So we probably put a more recent one in. I don't think the
I
very
don't
first
know.
one, but we'd say, fill out the questionnaire and then exchange it with each other, and sit down with your parents
And discuss
and
it.
or your spiritual authority, and have a discussion about, read through it and have a discussion about it, and figure out, is there something that's concerning here? What follow-up questions do you have? And it's funny how, follow-up questions, like a guy might have two follow-up questions and a girl might have
Have a
5
page.
pages of, questions. But, keep asking questions until you're satisfied that there is a spiritual and intellectual compatibility,
Right.
right? And that that if this was a person you had emotions for, it would be okay, right? And by the way, just because someone is spiritually and intellectually compatible doesn't mean there's going to be an emotional compatibility.
Right.
And so this goes to the personality here a bit, which is why parents being involved in the process can point out things like, how do and one of the things we wanna how do they act when they get upset, when they're disappointed, when
Mm,
they get angry? How do they respond? That's gonna, matter, and people often come from 2 different styles of response. Angela and I did. Angela came from um, the quiet silent
mm,
treatment type
yeah.
environment where, just had a loud spirit, but a glare of death.
So
Anyway, and I came from a "we're gonna talk this out now" kind of
loud
background,
spirit, loud
loud voice, yeah.
mouth.
And it was not compatible at first, but then we both got on board with fighting, so that worked out. That was early on in a marriage and why we ended up in marriage counseling. So, but it is true, that part of the courtship process is, as a parent, being able to help guide them through that process of compatibility in how they resolve issues and
Yeah.
how they approach those type of things. And if you have that relationship, you can have that influence.
Yep. Very true.
Yeah.
And it's a blessing. It's a joy when you get to be a part of all of it and see their relationships blooming in front of you and, get
Yeah.
to experience that with them. So,
Yeah. And so then we did premarital counseling with them,
because you're the
and
pastor.
I was also their pastor, but the things, topics we would cover about how to resolve conflicts,
Mm,
how to communicate properly, how to deal with finances and having a budget and keeping a ledger and knowing where your finances are and all of those type of things, were part of the training process in counseling, and then also up to dealing with intimacy. And a really good book that I highly recommend uh, is a book that deals with intimacy,
biblical.
biblical lovemaking, and it's you can get it on Amazon. It is an excellent book on that, and it's not
It's
dirty.
on the Song of
It's on the
Solomon.
Song of Solomon. It's a biblical based book.
Right.
It's not a dirty book or something like that, but it really
It's
gives
written by
a wonderful,
a Jewish
wonderful.
man, and
Yeah, and
it's
his
just
perspective on
really,
Song of Solomon is
yeah.
just excellent. He was a Christian, but he was a Jew when he
Mhm.
got saved before he got saved, But, so we had, I would give that book to a young person, but not until they're close to
Close.
the wedding
Yeah.
time. That's when we would have those discussions when they got close to the wedding time. I always wanted my kids to know that physical intimacy between a man and his wife, was good. We kissed in front of our kids all the time just to gross them out. I wanted my kids to know that their mom and dad loved each other and that we kissed and we would hold hands and I would hug on her and she would hug on me. I wanted them to see that affectionate relationship
Right.
and know that not only because it gives them a sense of security, but also because I want them to know that this is something to look forward to.
Sure.
Right? This is something to be desired, that there's nothing to be afraid of when you get married. I think that sometimes people put so much fear in their kids about
Don't touch, don't.
that it's like the kids are afraid to do anything, feel guilty once they get married,
Right.
and I think that you ought to be teaching them it is wonderful. It is a gift from God and it is an incredible joy, but it's one that's going to be tainted and you
Mhm.
know if you don't do it God's
If you
way.
don't,
There's danger if you don't
yeah.
do it God's way. And so, but all of that type of stuff I think is part of that process. So before they got married, we had those conversations. By the way, if I wasn't their pastor, I would have had the conversation with them just as a parent and said, look, there's some things you need to know, and I don't want them to get married and then feel like they have to go out and watch pornography to learn something about what intimacy
Right.
is. And I
Because they
would
won't learn the right
and
things.
I've never had those conversations outside
Mhm.
of that context with I wouldn't have that conversation with my kids outside of those contexts, but when they were getting married, I said, "Look, here's some principles, here's some ideas, here's some things." And I'm not talking about dirty things like that, but
Right.
just like encouraging them, you need to talk and you need to communicate while you're intimate and be open to each other. That is what intimacy is it's not just a physical act. It's the connection that takes place between a husband and a wife and that communication and the relationship there. And it's a good thing. And
Mhm.
so that was I mean, the courtship of our kids culminated in that conversation every time the night before their wedding.
Mhm.
and then they got married, and we're blessed.
Yeah,
I know
very.
that we're very blessed, that God gave our kids spouses, in their own ways. Each of them have had things they had to work through after they got married, but they had some tools to work through them, right?
Yes.
They had some
And
and
by the way, every couple will have things they have
of
to work through.
course, of course. That's just part of learning to live together,
Yeah.
learning to grow together, and so those are, I mean, that's how we approach
Yeah.
courtship. Again, I write about it. I write all of those principles out in the book, but I
And
but I want to emphasize, don't take them as law. Take them as principle, right? And
yeah.
and in the book, I may be more direct up that the Bible says this and this and this and this, but I assure you, if you try and control, you're going to be disappointed, and you need to influence and start as young as possible.
So the book is The Spiritual Home Raising Godly Children,
Yeah,
and you can get it at baptistauthors.com, or you can get it on Amazon. And on Amazon,
ebook and
ebook, audio, it's on Audible, and then also,
physical.
physical copy. So
Yeah. And then, thank you for the question. We have a number of other topic
yeah, we're
suggestions.
we're
We're going to
working
get
through
to them.
them.
And so we thank you for that. And this is episode 2 of the new year. And so we're excited about that. How can they reach out to us?
So you can reach out to us at cartersforhope@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment on the Life and Godliness Facebook page, um,
Or any of the
or
podcasts,
any of the
wherever you
podcasts.
listen. And please do this: like and
Mm.
subscribe and share.
Yes.
And that helps,
The more you like it, the more you
and comment
subscribe and comment,
and
it
share.
it moves it up the list and makes it more available
Yeah, and thank
for.
you to those who have been
Yeah,
sharing,
and thank you
the
for the comments.
podcast.
We've gotten several
We've gotten
comments
great
over the
comments.
last couple of weeks, and
Yeah, and even, we've gotten some
some
notes
personal
from
notes,
personal
and
notes
yeah.
of folks that God's, been able to minister to through these, and,
Yeah, it's such a
that's
blessing.
encouraging, absolutely encouraging, and so,
Yeah.
we're very thankful for that. Good.
I was just gonna say we enjoy doing the podcast. It's fun. We enjoy laughing and cutting up and things with each other, but it just is neat to see that it is helping other people. So
Yeah, absolutely. Because 'Cause we've messed everything up enough that we can tell people what not to do. That's at
yeah,
least the biggest portion
yeah,
of it.
it's
So
true.
anyway. All right. Well, God bless, and we hope that you're having a great New Year. We finish our first revival tonight,
Yeah.
and on to the next. But we're thankful for being able to serve the Lord and being able to be a part of that process, and being able to do this and be a part of hopefully ministering to you as well wherever you're at. And so, God bless, and we'll
We'll
see you
see you
next
next
time.